Greetings in the name of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I, the Emperor of Ethiopia, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Today we would like to speak about this concept concerning Abba Quidus. And we are going to have to ask ourselves some hard questions. And what we're going to have to realize is that this idea that His Majesty is a priest right now in the hills of Ethiopia who's going to live forever in the flesh is false. Okay? This idea of Abba Quidus has nothing to do with Emperor Haile Selassie I in any sort of logical way. You know? So now, the first thing that we need to understand is that God is somebody who follows His own laws. Okay, God is a righteous ruler, and any righteous ruler must follow their own laws. Okay, and the laws which God established in the beginning of the universe indicates that any organism, whether that's man, woman, a bee, a dog, any organism that takes upon a body, that body is temporary. Okay, it's temporary. Okay, and that's the way God established His creation. Is He going to follow that law, or is He going to go against it, living in the hills with the name Abba Quidus? Alright, so that's the question that we must ask ourselves. Now, based off of the reign of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I, based off of the principles that His Majesty has put into force, we must come to the conclusion that, you know, this idea of God living eternally in the flesh is not of God, and is something that His Majesty did not advocate. Okay? So, at His coronation, His Majesty was asked to take an oath. Alright? And let's analyze this oath. And let's, you know, really study what His Majesty said and what His Majesty did. Okay? So, at the coronation, the Abuna asked His Majesty to take this oath. These was the questions. They said, "Are you willing to defend the permanent laws established by the Orthodox Church of Alexandria, which from the time of the holy kings Abraha and Asbaha have been in existence and in force? Do you pledge that during your reign you will handle the populace with justice, kindness, and integrity? Will your Majesty be under the obligations of the laws that your Majesty established? And will you protect your empire and people in accordance with the codes of law you will have established?" Right? So let's think about that. Let's think about what they're asking His Majesty, because it's very clear that the question is, are you going to follow your own rules? Right? Will your Majesty be under the obligations of the laws that your Majesty established? Will you follow your own laws? That's the question posed to Haile Selassie. Will you follow your own laws? Okay? And here's His Majesty's answer, right? With his hand on the Holy Bible, His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I pledges his word of honor that he will be the righteous monarch demanded of himself, kisses the Bible with a strikingly obvious gesture of sincerity and solemnity, and then affixes his signature to a book in which is recorded all the words of the oath. Then the emperor sits back on his throne. Now, any person in a position of power cannot just, you know, dictate laws, you know, without following those laws. Because anyone in a position of power who is worthy of that position of power does not reach that level, you know, based off of their looks. Okay? A person becomes a ruler, a person becomes a leader based upon their character. which means that not only must they follow the laws that they put into place, the laws, the law of the land, they must actually not only be following it, but they must be following it to a higher degree than the common man. Otherwise, why are they the leader? What makes them the leader? Because they are breaking the laws? No, the people who break the laws are not called leaders. The people who break the laws are called criminals. And God is not a criminal. God is not someone who breaks his own law. Okay, the laws of nature was established by God. The laws of nature that these scientists are studying was not set up by the scientists. They're studying the operation of God. God is the one who set up, you know, these laws of the universe. Do you think he's going to follow it? You know, did God set it up for man to live forever in the flesh? So when God was manifest in the flesh, do you think he's going to follow his own laws? Or do you think he's going to go against his own laws? Alright? His Majesty said, leaders are people who raise the standards by which they judge themselves, and by which they are willing to be judged. The goal chosen, the objectives selected, the requirements imposed are not merely for their followers alone. Okay, the leader must follow his own laws. Okay, that is what His Majesty said, and that's what His Majesty did. Which is why a lot of people can't understand, you know, that's like a stumbling block that a lot of people trip over, because His Majesty operated in a natural and realistic manner. His Majesty furthermore, you know, advocated us to think rationally and for us not to associate him with these irrational ideas. His Majesty spoke about these things in many different ways, you know, and on various occasions. But it's a matter of, do we understand what he is saying, and can we make the connections with the principles that His Majesty stood for and the realities of our, you know, situation, the realities of His Majesty's reign? Can we bring his principles into real life? Okay, so His Majesty said, you know, that he as a leader, you know, and he was saying that all leaders must follow their own laws. Not only that, but they must raise the standards as well. So raising the standards does not mean going against and breaking the laws. Raising the standards means that you are following these laws to its highest and maximum degree. Okay, and the laws of biology, the laws of nature does not indicate that man or any other living organism who takes upon a body within this earthly domain is going to live in that body eternally. So is God going to follow that law, or is God going to break that law? All right, and we must really understand, you know, we must really take a look and analyze these things, you know, rationally, and ask ourselves, if His Majesty is Abba Quidus, as, you know, certain people proclaim that he is, if His Majesty is in the hills of Ethiopia right now, in a church somewhere, offering up praise, you know, what kind of example is that? You know, let's think about Ethiopia for a minute, and let's think about what happened after the revolution, when the Ethiopians went ahead and fought against the emperor. So now, when you know, the Ethiopians revolted against the monarchy, a military dictatorship was then put into play. This military dictatorship, you know, executed the senior officials within His Majesty's administration. This military dictatorship, you know, put his family into jail. A lot of his family members died in jail. This military dictatorship slaughtered the Ethiopian people in hellacious numbers, and you're telling me that His Majesty was alive and present during all of this in some church in the hills of Ethiopia doing what? Alright, is that the character? Is that the example of Haile Selassie, to sit back and pray and do nothing while his people, while his family are being tortured and killed and dying in jail unjustly? That, you're telling me, is the example of Haile Selassie? Not true. That's what you would do in that situation. If your family gets thrown in jail, if your people are being killed, you're the one who would sit back and do nothing. You're the one who will go into a church and pray and think that supernaturally something will stop, you know, this crime from being committed. That's something that you would do. That's not something that His Majesty would do. His Majesty is not going to sit around and watch as his people are being executed, as his family dies in jail unjustly. He's not just going to sit back and do nothing about that. That is not Haile Selassie. So we have to be careful of what we say in His Majesty's name, and we must really understand who Haile Selassie is. All right, because he was a man capable of lashing out in sudden and unexpected ways. All right, this is a description of Haile Selassie. All right, for those who obviously do not know who the emperor was. All right, because anything could be said of him save that he was a coward. From the mortal struggle with Lis Yasu and the equally mortal battle with Mussolini, up to the battles of Sagali and Mechu, from the days of the Gideon Force, up to those of the narrowly averted coup d'etat of 1960, the Negus had never betrayed moments of weakness or fear. At the age of 82, he might very well be tired, but he never shrank from a fight, nor gave up on a battle. That is the Lion of Judah. He never backed down. So you're telling me that while his people, he never ran away from a fight. So while his people are being killed, while his family is being killed, you're telling me that, what did he do about it? Nothing? That he backed down from that challenge? He backed down from the military, you know, the Derg, he backed down from them? That's what you're telling me, that he's alive and he was capable of doing something, yet he did nothing? You're telling me that that's Haile Selassie? Well, I think that that's why they changed the name up. And I think that that's why they call him Abba Quidus now. Because what you're saying, this example that you're saying that, you know, that this person demonstrated is not Haile Selassie. Because Haile Selassie would never run away from any sort of challenge. He would never allow his family or his people to be killed and do absolutely nothing about it. That is not what His Majesty was about in no moments of his entire life. Okay? So the divinity of Haile Selassie is not justified based upon him living eternally in the flesh. We must understand that God is a spirit. Okay, so when God was manifest in the flesh in 1892, that's not when God was created. Okay, because God was around. God is a spirit. God is immortal. God is eternal, but not in the flesh. God is a spirit, which means that He's always here and He always will be here, but not walking in the flesh in his embodiment. Okay, so 1892 does not dictate the beginning of God, and 1975 does not dictate the ending of God either. Okay, because God is justified in the spirit. He's not justified in the flesh. The divinity does not, his divinity is not based upon him living forever in the flesh. Because if God lives forever in the flesh, first of all, that's going against his own laws. That's going against the laws of nature. Because God didn't establish it like that. God did not establish the universe for man to live forever in the flesh. And we must come to realize that God follows his own laws. The Bible said to be holy as the Lord is holy. So God established the laws that he is holy. And now he said for you to be like him. For you to be holy as he is holy. Because he follows his own edicts. We must come to understand these things. We must put these things into real life. Okay, we must make the connections. Alright? There's a speech from His Majesty where His Majesty said, by the word neutral, we do not of course mean that abstention from political activity, which has been for so long the hallmark of a Switzerland. Alright, so we understand what Switzerland does, right? Switzerland, no matter if World War II is occurring, no matter how many people are being killed around them, Switzerland just sits there and does nothing. Which is the example that they're trying to say about Abba Quidus. That Abba Quidus, while the Red Terror was taking place, Abba Quidus just sat in a, in the church in the mountains doing nothing while this was taking place. Okay? Offering up a prayer while his people are being killed. Okay? His Majesty said that that's not what we're about. Okay? He said we can no more refrain from political activity in the year 1961 than man today can voluntarily refrain from partaking in the radioactive fallout which will be bestowed upon him should a nuclear holocaust erupt on this globe. Alright, so if you want to be a pacifist who does nothing while, people are being killed and while terror is taking place, then what's going to happen if terror comes knocking at your door? Would you like for someone to stand up for you? You would, wouldn't you? But you're not willing to stand up for these other people who are being terrorized and victimized and killed and tortured. Is that what His Majesty did? Did His Majesty just sit back and do nothing while his family was killed, while his people was being killed, because he had better things to do, sitting in a church praying, singing songs? You're telling me that that's what His Majesty did? No, that's what you would do. That's something that you may do. You may sit back, and do nothing while your people are being killed and while your family is thrown into prison unjustly and dying in jail. They sitting in jail for so long that they die in jail. That may be something that you would do. But that is definitely not something that Emperor Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia will do. Okay? His Majesty said, nor does neutrality mean that without taking sides we content ourselves with urging that the powers most intimately concerned negotiate in good faith to the solution of the issues in dispute between them. We have passed the point where prayerful pleading serves any purpose other than to debase those who thereby abdicate any responsibilities or power to influence events. Alright, that's very clear cut, that there is no way possible for His Majesty to sit in the mountains in church while his people and his family is being unjustly murdered in hellacious numbers. His Majesty said we have passed the point where we're just going to pray and sit by and abdicate our responsibility to influence events. If Haile Selassie was alive in the flesh, okay, if Haile Selassie was alive in the flesh during the Red Terror, okay, you had better understand that he would have done something about it. Everything about him, everything about his speeches, his character, everything about His Majesty, if you understand anything about him, should let you understand, and you should know that he would never sit back and do nothing while his people and while his family is being slaughtered. All right? Now maybe you don't have the backbone and the courage to stand up and to fight and to stop, you know, injustice from taking place, but His Majesty does have that character. His Majesty does have that willingness to stand up and to be a voice for, you know, the oppressed, a voice for those who are being victimized, to put an end and to influence events, to put an end to injustice. That's what he was always about. Okay, and for you know, certain people to come up with this false idea of Abba Quidus, because they have not been able to draw the connections between the speeches, the character, the mission of Haile Selassie, and put these principles into real terms. Because they wasn't able to do that, they now invent these myths. Okay, these myths to fit within their own ideologies. Okay, so they've been brought up with this idea that the supernatural, you know, does exist, because this is how the religious world thinks. But this is not what Haile Selassie advocated. But instead of following the principles and the edicts of Haile Selassie, they cling on to their old habits, and they cling on to the old ideas that they heard from their mother and father, the old ideas that they heard from the Roman priests about the supernatural, about, you know, a man who lived thousands of years ago and is going to come back again. So this man is eternal in the flesh. They believe these false ideas instead of believing in the words and the principles and the philosophy of Emperor Haile Selassie I. You know, we're not going to make the same mistakes of our forefathers. We're not going to make the same mistake that, you